Okay, if there's nobody who would like to speak, we'll just move on to the first resolution. Item 4, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton and the City of Chattanooga, Tennessee, authorizing the execution of a stadium property transfer agreement, stadium site prep development agreement, West 26 infrastructure development agreement, stadium lease agreement, and master parking agreement, and a change of parties to a development agreement.
Hey, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Jermaine Freeman from the Kelly administration. As you just read out, Mr. Chair, we have several agreements that are coming before the board in substantially the form attached today, including the lease for the team, the West 26th Street infrastructure agreement, the stadium property transfer agreement, stadium site prep development agreement, and the master parking agreement. And so with that, we will ask Mark Mamontov, who has been working with us and providing counsel to us, to come and provide you sort of an overview of each document. And so I'll ask Mark to come up now, and then after that, we can answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Good morning again. I'm Mark Mamontov, and so this resolution, we're trying to bring documents to you in an incremental fashion, because at the next meeting, we would bring to you the bond documents, the bond indenture, which would be the big document, or we would issue bonds, as well as some other documents relative to financing. So what we've tried to do is, like, this was project document today, and then your next meeting would be financing document day. I know it's a lot, and I'm sorry to burden you all with all this, and there's not an urgency to approve these documents, other than we would like to be able to keep moving forward, because they would not be signed until we're ready to close the bond issue. But again, we're trying to do this hopefully in a logical fashion that brings things together. The thing, I didn't do a PowerPoint today because the stadium lease is probably the most significant document. I've already gone through that in some detail with you all. We feel like it's in substantially final form now. We're getting some, what I would call, minor wording changes still from Major League Baseball, but I think we're 95% there with Major League Baseball. This is largely based on our lease in Knoxville, which was the first lease that Major League Baseball approved under their new PDL system. So it's kind of hard for them to object too much to something they've already approved, but they still are finding ways to do that. So we're working a little bit through that. There is we're still trying to work through property insurance. Just want to emphasize, I know you all know this, that you will be the owner of this stadium. This is the Sports Authority Stadium. Unlike the current AT&T field, which is technically held by the Sports Authority of Chattanooga, which is not a joint entity, but the team can buy that stadium at any time for a nominal sum. So they are the tax owner, for all intent and purposes, that they are the owner. And so they are insuring that one. But here we're the owner. And so generally the city is exploring the cost of that. And so you saw that language bracketed as to who will be incurring that expense. And so that still is one issue that we're still trying to resolve. We're also working with Jason to get his accountants happy with how they treat the depreciation on some of the personal property, because most of it will depreciate during the term of this lease, and who gets the benefit? We don't need depreciation. As you all well know, you're not trying to have turn a profit from a financial statement perspective. And he is largely, from an economic perspective, buying that through the tax increment financing that's being done through the Industrial Development Board. So those are the primary things that we're trying to iron out some things. But other than that, the stadium lease is essentially done, and I believe, as the resolution says, in substantially final form, and it's consistent with what I've described to you all before: a 30-year lease, $1 million rent, small inflationary increases that would go into the capital reserve fund, 8 civic events a year, that this board, the city, the county can ask to be held at the stadium, and it's very similar in terms to other. We've studied leases from all over the country. From a financial perspective, the rent being paid here is substantially high. It's even higher than what they're doing in Knoxville, because there's no inflationary increases in Knoxville. So as far as I am aware, this is the highest rent being paid by a AA team anywhere in the country. What we don't know, and what Jason is largely taking the risk on is naming rights. That is probably the biggest benefit to them, particularly located where it is in such a visible location on the interstate. That would hopefully be very valuable to them. And so we've talked about why, at least in my judgment, it's better to let them have the naming rights in terms of coordination with marketing and things like that. But, the financial success long-term for the team and the stadium will, to some extent, that will be a significant factor. The team, AA baseball teams, I'm not meaning to step on Jason's toes, are not particularly lucrative things just based on their inherent operations. It's things like naming rights and other events there that will be relevant. So does anybody, I don't know if you want me to go over all these documents and come back, but does anybody want to have any questions about the stadium? I know I've been through this one quite a bit. Okay. Probably the next most important document is the master parking agreement. This has been something that we have spent hours negotiating with the site owner. Some stadiums are truly urban stadiums. They're going in places where you already have a lot of structured parking that people can just go park. We are not building any parking in Knoxville for our stadium. They're going to use the parking garages next to our Civic Coliseum, which are about a 10-minute walk. We're going to run shuttle buses, things like that. And the reason I'm even bringing that up is that you're different here because you are serving as an anchor tenant for the redevelopment of probably the most redevelopment site in the city of Chattanooga, right there on the interstate. And so, but there's no parking. I mean, there's not parking garages. I mean, you could walk from downtown. There's plenty of parking downtown. You could hop on the Greenway on your bike. I hope tons of people do that, but at least in the near-term future, there's not going to be parking. The team is committed to manage that for us. It's part of the economics of the deal. It's how Jason was able to borrow an additional $3 million to contribute in equity to the deal. But the parking lots have been committed to initially 2 very large lots, 2,000 spaces, essentially adjacent to the stadium. Now, over time, we want them to develop those properties. We want them to build beautiful buildings with structured parking on those things. And so this is the document that basically sets the terms of they agree to provide those lots up front, and then long-term, as the site develops, it gives them the ability to move parking so that those 2 particularly valuable spots can be developed somewhere in the future as structured parking is developed. And so this agreement that we're paying nothing else, I mean, like, we're not paying rent back to them to use these lots. We get these, we're gonna have an easement for them. And the difficult part of negotiating this document was agreeing on the terms under which they can move the site. And we're still, I think this one is 98% done and in substantially final form. We're still trying to work through ADA parking type issues. We obviously don't want them to, I mean, we can generally walk a good distance, and it's healthy for us all, right? But we need to have good parking for accessible parking. The interesting thing part of this is if this develops the way we hope, there'll be a lot of parking, and so it's just hard to predict exactly how that will look long term. So that agreement is obviously important. The side donation agreement is also a very important document, but it got a lot shorter. We've been working on this, as you know, so long, and thank you guys for your service. Some of you all of you all have been doing almost 2 years now. I know, I can't believe that, and so thank you. And so the site donation agreement is the agreement under which the site owner, the current site owner, which is Pipe Properties. There's Perimeter Properties and Pipe Properties. Pipe owns this particular site, and so they would be donating this property for the stadium. And so obviously we're grateful for that. This is the terms of that. It addresses the environmental issues. Been working with Phil on that. We have outside environmental counsel looking over provisions. He's made some suggestions I think we can work through. But I mean, this entire site is under a recorded brownfield agreement that TDEC negotiated and really wants to be helpful in seeing the site redeveloped. And so we have broad protections under that brownfield agreement. We're also getting indemnity for issues that might arise during the site. I mean, if they dig on this site and find an underground storage tank, that's on them, not on you all. It's not something that we just don't have that in our budget. And so we, with Phil's help, result, we were able to address those issues. So that's largely covered by that site donation agreement. And then they will be on site doing a lot of work already. They're working on infrastructure work to help start developing the entire Wheeland Foundry U.S. pipe site. And so cost efficiency wise, it made sense for them. I'm talking about the current site owner, Perimeter Pipe, to do some of the early work to get the stadium site ready for us. It's about $10 million worth of work. They're probably also going to do, they will be also doing, I'll get to that in a second, some other public infrastructure work, but the next agreement is called the Stadium Site Prep Development Agreement. This is essentially an agreement where it's going to make it pad ready for us. In other words, we can just get out there and build. And so they're going to get it out there, and Bill Payne can certainly answer more technical questions. I was happy to see him here. So if you have those, I would certainly defer to Bill, but he has spent hours and hours working with the site owner on who is going to do what and what's the most cost-efficient way to do it. And that is the agreement under which we will designate very specific tasks that they will do to get the site ready for our use at roughly a $10 million value. And then I think we called it 26th Street Infrastructure Agreement. Basically, we're bringing 26 around to provide great access to the stadium along with utilities and things like that. And that is something that the city has some funds budgeted in the fiscal year that just started, and then there'll be hopefully more funds in the next fiscal year. And so that certainly is the intent. It's, again, roughly $10 million of expenditures, and you as the Sport Authority want to see adequate public infrastructure to serve the stadium, and that's why it's through you all. And from a procurement, this is not traditional procurement. From the city perspective, this would not work well. The city has used similar alternative procurement things for some wastewater and sewer, so they're familiar with using affiliated entities like the Sports Authority on this sort of thing, such as the Industrial Development Board. And this would allow, again, the site owner, Pipe Properties Perimeter, who will be out there anyway, to go ahead and do some of the public infrastructure work. I've learned all about jack and bore, which I never even heard of before, and now it's the most common term on our conference calls. But basically, for example, they need to dig under the interstate to provide good drainage. And so you'll see some reference to that in the documents. And so that's an example of what would be done as part of this agreement. I think I hit all of them. I know that was long, but I'm really glad to answer questions. I know Bill would be glad to answer questions about construction aspects, and I know Jermaine would be glad to answer questions from the city perspective. I don't see if Corey is here. There he is, Corey and Lee. Lee's here. The money man's here. So he's about to slap me down for spending money, I'm sure, but doesn't think so. We're all glad to answer questions. So.
Well, Mark, as the attorney for this board in
Yes.
this setting on here, just trying to make sure this board does not have a whole lot of funds out there for insurance costs. And do we have any estimates of where those will be and how much, how they can be provided?
Yes. Jermaine, I think, is starting to get preliminary estimates from the city's risk folks who buy property insurance and what the cost would be to add this as a policy and I'm sorry to use Knoxville as an analogy, but it's such a similar project thing. They're planning there to add it to the county's, sorry, Lee, I'm not saying we're going to do that here, but to the county's policy at roughly 74 cents, I was telling them, per $100,000 of value. So there it was like, it would be based on a $115 million value, but that includes a lot of, this would be, the property insurance would probably need to be closer to about $80 to $85 million based on actual construction costs. And so it probably would be not in that range. The initial estimates that Jermaine has been getting have been a little bit more than that. So we're not excited about that, but it is something that I know that Jermaine has talked to Corey about, and we just got to work it out, and we don't have a final answer, and I would be lying to you to say that we do at this moment.
Sure. Just want to make sure we have that on the record.
Yes.
This body does not have a whole lot of money to do that.
No, they have no money.
Yes.
Think so. Sorry, guys.
You mentioned two very large lots on the master parking agreement as well.
Yes.
Do we have spaces, at least something about the number of spaces?
2,000 with attended parking. In other words, if you've gone to baseball games, I'm sure some of you all have, you pull in and there's the guy with the flag saying, go here, and you're squeezed in there like sardines. But basically Andy assures me, and he's ready to get up here and swear in front of all of you all that they can fit 2,000 cars on that lot. So you see him nodding. Maria, can you make sure that's in the minutes there? So I just added it by saying that, so.
As long as they're all minis.
I'm sorry?
As long as they're all minis.
They're all minis?
Yes.
He was kidding about the minis. They can all be Hummers.
I believe Daisy had a question.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for that very brief, concise, presentation there.
Okay.
I have a couple of questions that I think, you may or may not already be aware of, and that is, administration cost in general, with insurance being one of them, which is rather significant. What provisions are there for those costs to be covered in this agreement?
So-
Things like arbitrage, audit,
Right.
any third-party contract. I know Phil is doing it for free,
Yes.
but no, he's not.
Sometimes I wonder, yes, ma'am.
Actually,
Bill is the best value we have here. I will readily concur with that. So,
but yeah, what are the provisions there? Because as you know, some other boards do have an administration fee.
and Ms. Madison, it's a great question, a good point. My earlier drafts obviously were passing the cost of the property insurance onto the team, and so we've just started working on dealing with that issue. We need to also, not likely, once you're going to have debt, you're going to need to get an annual audit. So starting with this fiscal year, I would guess that you should estimate or expect that this body, and Lee, please correct me, and I see Vicky's here as well, in Knoxville was roughly $16,000 a year to audit the sports authority. And so I would suggest that you're going to be in that range to do that. So that's going to be an expense. I don't think we're going to need an arbitrage rebate analysis because I really believe they're going to easily meet the 2-year spend down on this one. So I am going to stay on them, and if they don't meet that, we got big problems because the stadium's supposed to open during that 2-year period. So I'm hoping we won't need a rebate analysis, which is what Ms. Madison is referring to, and it's a really good question. Usually that could be another $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how complicated it is. We are going to obviously have to have a solution to the payment of these expenses by the August meeting, and none of these expenses, property insurance will not kick in until the building is ready to go. Builder's risk will cover it during the construction period insurance, which is being maintained under the construction contract, and then our audit expense will probably not come due almost for a year from now, but we need to be prepared to come up with an answer. And that is the best non-answer. I know, I'm sorry, that is just not a great answer, but we are working through it is really the honest answer.
It's on the table for discussion.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. If I may, one last question is, I think as I was reading the document, the property it reverts back to the owner after, if it ceases to be used as a stadium. So I would imagine we will have at least 30 years before this is paid off. So after 30 years, if it turns out that it's not used as a sports authority, for the purpose intended here, and the sports authority has put in over $100+ million, that is saying then that property goes back to the owner,
Yes.
and we just lose out.
I'm really glad you pointed that out. And so we expect, and we'll be working with Andy's lawyer for specific wording, but this is analogous, again, to Randy Boyd donated our property in Knoxville. It is not that I want to make clear that it does not have to be a baseball team there. what it needs to be continued to be used for civic community purposes. It could be just being used for high school baseball games after this. What these guys don't want, and it's fair, is they don't want a dead stadium in the midst of their development, that we just close it down. We need, if we at some point decide as a community, you all decide that you want to abandon the stadium and not use it for civic purposes, then that would go back to them. Otherwise, it would stay for you all. It is not tied to the ongoing location of professional baseball there at the stadium.
But after spending over $100 million plus in the property, we don't have any say, if you will, on how it's used. Based upon
You have total
changes
say
in
over
it.
how it's used, yes.
Well, that maybe was too extreme. Based upon possible changes in the economy or in the environment that says, this would be good for another economic development initiative.
Yes.
let's say. We don't have that option.
That's exactly right, and it's a good point. And we had that very same discussion. If Andy would like to address his concerns as the site owner, I think. But that's exactly what they would say, I believe, if they were standing here, is look, if we decide it would be better use for a retail shopping center and we want to go RFP a retail shopping, they want to do that, not us. As long as it's a community use, it stays with the community. But if we wanted to convert it to private housing, a retail center, that is a very much an issue. And if this is, something that's a concern to this board, we certainly can continue. We will have very precise language for you all in a deed to show you all by the next meeting. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but you're exactly right.
No. Yeah, you answered it. At the end of the day, we really don't own it, except to the extent that we are told how to use it. And to the extent that we don't use it for civic purposes, we don't have and it's determined that it's more feasible to use it for other purposes.
Yeah.
That would be advantageous to the public sector and the private sector. Then that particular opportunity reverts back to the initial owner.
Yeah, what I would analogize this to, Ms. Madison, is if someone came to you and said, look, I will donate 2 acres in the middle of downtown Chattanooga for a beautiful park, but I always want you to use it as a park. And if you stop using it as a park, I want it back. And we see that quite often across the state. People want to, for a specific purpose, a public purpose. And so that is what I analogize this to. If the city, in my examples, realize, oh, wait a minute, this park property is now really valuable. I want to now develop it for an office building. It's essentially a restrictive covenant from being able to do that.
I understand.
Yeah.
And a park is different in that a park, there is no private benefit. In this particular case, hopefully the state corporation will make money on this, because we wouldn't be doing it otherwise. We want them to. So it's a little different, but I get it. Just wanted to make sure I understood it.
Yeah, I'm really so glad that we talked about this publicly and that we talked about the board. I should have went over that. That's an important point.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Jermaine, did you have anything to add, or Bill, or team, owners, county? Thank you.
Well, if there's no further questions, do I have a motion to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Second. Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Approved.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. Opposed?
Section 5, resolution of the Board of Directors of the Sports Authority of the County of Hamilton and the City of Chattanooga, Tennessee, authorizing change order number 2 to the construction manager at risk contract with EMJ LLC for the South Broad District Ballpark Project D-23-001-201 in the amount of $9,122,084.07 for early release package number 2, including but not limited to installation of aggregate piers, helical piers, submittals for rebar and concrete, steel submittals, electrical switchgear, and other equipment, HVAC equipment deposits, temporary site facilities infrastructure, erosion control, site safety, and certain mobilization costs for a revised total amount of $9,477,717.07.
It's a long one.
That's a mouthful.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Bill Payne, city engineer for the city of Chattanooga. And this contract or this resolution would be for the second change order to the contract with EMJ. That initial contract with EMJ is the construction manager at risk contract, which was entered into last July. There has been one small addition of a few items that were added back in December. Basically, this work is that is listed is for things like foundations and some long lead time items, all of which we need to make sure those things move ahead at an appropriate time and make so that they can be delivered whenever they're needed. Obviously, the foundations are there so that we can begin construction coming up out of the ground. And then the other items are for equipment that we need to make sure is delivered and ready at the time that the stadium is ready to receive those as part of the construction. This would go hand in hand with the site preparation agreement that Mark was describing. So there are some, even to be able to get the foundation subcontractors on site does take a little bit of time for the general contractor to be able to get them on site. And that amount of time can't happen while the property owner is performing their work on the site preparation agreement. So that's the reason why we're doing this slightly ahead of the guaranteed maximum price amendment. But we are working on that guaranteed maximum price amendment and anticipate having that at your next meeting as well, so that you would have that. All of these costs that you see here for the full amount of $9.4 million, all would be encompassed within the guaranteed maximum price. So don't be concerned that you're spending money now and there's more to come. The numbers that we will talk about in August will encompass and essentially fold in everything that's here on this list. This early release package is simply that. It's to be able to give the opportunity that as the property owner begins their work on site development, and we are working towards a deadline to be able to get the stadium open, that we're able to release some of these critical path items so that they can move along in a timely fashion and not hold up any of the construction. So I'd be happy to answer any questions along that. A couple of these items, I will mention this for anybody who recalls the first change order. A couple of the items that you see on here are worded very similarly to some of what was in that initial change order, and that is intentional, and that was basically some of that scope in December was very small, and it was geared towards design, or some of the design elements we didn't necessarily have to execute those, and so they're being incorporated here, but in a larger facet. And in a larger piece. A lot of this work also includes, these amounts actually include sort of the full contract scope for some things that will take some months to be able to fully happen. But in order to get the pieces that we need in the early section, EMJ needs to be able to commit to the full contract amount with the subcontractor. So that is part of why you're seeing some of these things that appear to be similar wording to what was done before, and why the amounts are listed the way they are here. So be glad to answer any questions though.
So Bill, representing the authority in this case, where's this $9,477,717.07 going to come from, since we don't have any assets yet until we have a bond sale?
This board has passed a reimbursement resolution, so that would be the expectation that this, along with the design expenditures, due diligence expenditures that we have undertaken on the board's behalf over the last 18 months or so, this would all be reimbursable from those proceeds, from those bonds, and from the other financing that comes available. But that's ultimately where it would come from. The cash flow on this, we will actually see very little of these dollars actually have to be paid out on behalf of the Sports Authority by the time the bond, the anticipated bond sale.
Yes.
So that's it is a small amount of exposure, relatively speaking. So while it's $9 million, we would not fully go out and spend $9 million before bonds would actually occur. And so if for any reason it was necessary to have to stop this work, we would only be liable and responsible to EMJ for the actual costs, plus any of their percentage fee markups that are included in the current contract. So there are limitations on the exposure to what is actually spent, but the expectation is that this would be reimbursed from the bond proceeds once they're issued.
Whole lot of metal in there is the reason I was wondering about in that regard. So those have to be at least ordered in advance here. And if that metal is it available for use on other projects if it does not go through here?
Yeah, and a lot of what will happen in these, let's just say, in the next 60 days, right? Between now and the next 60 days, what a lot of this is really going to happen is while there may be work with a structural steel provider in order to be able to place that order, the first thing the structural steel provider has to do is they have to create shop drawings, which have to be drawn up and detailed out for exactly the way the steel needs to be cut. It needs to be welded and fabricated, and how all those pieces are going to happen. They then have to turn around and submit that through the general contractor to the architect, and all that has to be reviewed and approved. Those things are all going to take time. That's the reason why I was mentioning there's not a lot of initial dollars that get spent on this, but in order to be able to authorize the beginning of the shop drawings, you have to place an order for a larger amount of steel. Even once the shop drawings are approved, it still takes weeks and months for that fabrication to actually happen, because other projects for are in that queue in the system, so to speak, for being fabricated. So this essentially gets the shop drawing started and then gets us a place in line.
Yes, sir.
Which could be, that fabrication may not begin until after the bonds are actually issued in some cases.
Yes, sir.
And same thing is true for the electrical switch gear, the HVAC work. Those types of things have to be specified. They have long lead times for the manufacturing, but getting the order placed gets us a place in line so that it can be manufactured and then delivered timely for our project.
Yes, sir. Just wanted that on the record, since this is the sports authority for the city and the county concerning those items.
Certainly.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Phil always takes my question out of my mouth. But thank you for the answers. But just for clarification, this board and/or the city or county or not having to cash flow or spend any money prior to the bond proceeds? Prior to receipt of the bond proceeds?
Correct. Prior to receipt of the bond proceeds, any invoices that came in would have to be cash flowed.
By way of, because this entity has no money.
Correct.
So,
Yeah,
which is the heart of his question.
Yes.
Right. So the cash flow by,
Right. The city of Chattanooga is currently handling all of the invoicing and contractual pieces on this project. So that's where those
right.
that's where those would come
So
from.
to the point here, because I think it came up earlier, is this the resolution that was put on the agenda and had to be, you took it off because we had not done all the i's and crossed the t's for the bond sale? No. There was one resolution that came before us, and we could not approve it. You took it off because we had not, I had assumed we had not done the reimbursement resolution for the bond sale.
Oh, now, we have had a couple of different versions of early release, which we have prepared from time to time based on the way that the bond financing and the overall private financing are coming together. It's not really private financing, it's the TIF financing that goes through the Industrial Development Board for the amounts that are not being financed by the Sports Authority Board. But yes, we have pulled those packages together at multiple times and had them ready in the event that these other documents, like the ones that Mark has presented earlier, that you all just voted on, we have had a couple of different times, some early release packages ready. If those documents had been ready, and for a variety of reasons, they weren't ready at that time. And so while, yes, we had it there, but we did hold it back because it needed to coincide, right? This is not something we would be doing if the site preparation agreement, the donation agreement, all were not in front of you and ready to be acted upon by the board. So that's the reason for those earlier times. This was a much simpler piece for the contractor to be able to pull together and for us to be able to have ready at the point in time when it was appropriate. Those other times, it was there and waiting, and we just needed to make sure that the timing coincided like it is now.
So straightforward. We now have a reimbursement bond resolution.
Yes, there is a reimbursement bond resolution
Okay.
from 2022, yes.
Okay, and we also now have, and these dollars will be cash flowed by way of the city of Chattanooga until the actual bond proceeds are received.
Yes.
Which is not uncommon, but I just.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And just to help those who may not be familiar with some of that process, but just thinking about this, we're here today talking about it. It will take us, we will have to sign these change order documents. The contractor is then going to have to sign his subcontracts. It will take a month or more for them to be able to get things in place, and then they will invoice, which will then take a little bit of time. So while, yes, there is some cash flow that occurs in that time, there's not a lot of dollars that are actually really going to move before bonds would be issued in this case. And as I mentioned before, we would be limited to any actual expenditures if there was a reason that we needed, that this work wasn't fully completed.
Thank you.
If there is a delay in the bond process, or is the city and county at risk of distributing $9+ million to cover these costs?
Yeah, and I would say if it turned out there was going to be a delay in the bonds, then we would take appropriate actions underneath the contract terms, either to pause the work until we made sure that we were in the right location. So that is something that administratively we would do and have the ability to do within the contract language.
I don't think it's a city and county. I think it's just a city cash flow. Is that right?
Yes.
Right.
Any other questions? Thank you, Bill.
My pleasure.
Do we have a motion to approve this resolution?
I move for approval.
I make a motion for approval of resolution SA 025.
Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Approved. Item 6, do we have any other business to discuss, Jermaine?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. As some of you may be aware, we have a groundbreaking ceremony on Monday. And so I'm looking forward to seeing all of you there. The forecast is calling for it to be a cool Chattanooga 99 degrees. But having said that, this is a big project and we appreciate everyone's help and assistance. We greatly appreciate, on behalf of both the city and county, all of the work that you all have done to get us to this point, including the work that you have done today. So we look forward to seeing you on Monday at 10:30 a.m., right, guys? 10:30. Yes.
I have one more.
Yeah.
This is sort of an over, meaning it's going back. I just wanted to clarify that under those reversionary terms, it would be great if there was something that would allow some mutual negotiations and discussions, except because the city, by way of this board, is putting an awful lot of money into the project. Or I'll just say this board is putting an awful lot of money into the project for 30 years. And not knowing what 30 years mean from now, would look like from now. it would be good if we had something there other than you're out of luck.
Sure.
Okay,
We will continue those discussions. Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us any update on the timing of when the bonds are going to be involved?
Sure. I'll ask Mr. Mamentov to come make a comment to that.
The schedule we're working on right now calls for us to bring the bond documents to you at your August 8th meeting, a pricing of bonds the week of August the 19th, and a closing the first week of September. That is our goal right now. So no vacations at Labor Day, please, Mr. Chair.
Open the 19th? 19th of,
And then 1st of September.
Okay.
Thanks, Jermaine. Any other business? Okay, this meeting's adjourned.